Hello and welcome back to another episode of Bitesize Cinema. I'm your host RJ McCready, and for this episode I'm going to be taking you guys back to the year in 1991 to look at the high school under siege action adventure movie Toy Soldiers. So let's not be late for class, let's go and have a look at a trailer, and I'll see you guys soon.
The Regis School for Boys, where the country's best families
Hey, bring that back here!
send the world's worst students.
If you're gonna kick me out, kick me out.
They'd make 4 prep schools in 4 years. You're trying for the Guinness Book of Records?
But these boys are in for a real shock.
Fuego! If you do not produce my father unharmed, I will begin executing the hostages. I'm sure by now you have discovered who their parents are.
Chairman of the Armed Services Committee, Vice Chairman of the Republican Party.
What does your father do, William?
Contractor?
According to this, he owns the 3rd largest construction company in the world.
Yeah, he's a contractor.
My boys, many of them, they have a real problem with authority.
Are you with me or not?
Of course we're with you.
But if you get a shot, we're gonna be PO'd.
I have the assault force in the staging area 5 minutes away.
You have seen these orange wires. These are wired to explosives.
The kid can get the other students out of the line of fire.
If any one of these wires is cut, they will explode!
This kid has been kicked out of 2 schools.
Well, 3 schools.
Yeah. No. That's a detonator.
He's got guts. He's a leader. If Billy says he can do it, I gotta believe he can.
That's the signal. All right. We're really gonna do this? You bet.
Toy Soldiers.
And welcome back, guys. So the synopsis for this film is a group of troublemaking boys decide to take a stand when terrorists seize control of their boarding school. It's got a 111-minute runtime and it's a R-rated movie, and it's classed as a action drama thriller. The movie was backed by TriStar Studios for $10 million and it made a $15 million return at the boxes, so it didn't do massive, but it didn't do too bad, so sort of fairly moderate box office at the time. It was directed by Daniel Petrie Jr. and this is his first time directing, having a look at his IMDb. And he's actually the writer for Beverly Hills Cop, so he did a lot of writing work before directing. And this film was written by David Cope, and you may know him for films such as Jurassic Park, Mission Impossible and Spider-Man. He also wrote Indiana Jones as well. So all in all, you've got some talented guys attached to this film, and you've also got the guy who composed the score is Robert Falk, and you may know him for the Police Academy films. He did the score for Police Academy, so when you listen to the music in this film you can just hear the tones of Police Academy in the background there. And the film is based on a novel by William B. Kennedy of the same name. The only difference is that it's set in a European school and you've got Palestinian terrorists involved, and that's pretty much the only difference really. And let's have a look at the cast of this movie. So you pretty much got like the sort of Brat Pack cast, as they say, so in the 80s or certainly as the 90s now that we got. So you got Sean Austin, and you know him from like the Goonies, and he did the Memphis Belle around about this time, and he plays Billy Temper. You got Will Wheaton from Stand By Me and Star Trek, he plays Joey. Keith Coogan, you may never know him from Adventures in Babysitting, and he plays a character called Snuffy. Andrew Divoff, he plays the bad guy in this, and apparently this is one of his favourite roles as an actor. And he's in a horror film called Wishmaster and Air Force One. And Louis Gossett Jr. is in this film. He's always good when you see him in a movie. He's in Iron Eagle, Officer and a Gentleman, and he plays the school principal in this film, and his name is Dean Parker. And R. Lee Ermey, the drill sergeant from Full Metal Jacket, he turns up as General Kramer. And again, a little bit of trivia there is like Louis Gossett Jr. played the drill sergeant and R.L. Ermey played the drill sergeant. One in Officer and the Gentleman, one in Full Metal Jacket, so they've both turned up in the same film here, so a little bit of trivia there. D. Holm Elliott, You'll know him from the Indiana Jones franchise, and he plays the headmaster. He's pretty good at that sort of role. And Michael Champion is in this film, and he's kind of like your go-to bad guy. He's in Beverly Hills Cop as a bad guy, and he's a bad guy in this. And he looks a little bit like the Clarence Boddicker character from RoboCop, where he's got the glasses on. He just looks a bit sinister. So yeah, he does pretty good in this, and his name is Jack Thorpe. And before I go into the production side of this film, we've got a little bit of trivia here. It's only a small amount of trivia for this film. So, as I mentioned earlier, Andrew Divoff, his favourite role, playing a bad guy. The banana scene in this was actually ad-libbed. Do you want to pick up that banana? So Sean Astin was actually eating a banana whilst they were prepping for this scene, and he actually threw the banana down. It's actually the scene where they take out all the furniture of Louis Gossett's office as a bit of a prank. And he just threw the banana down after eating it, and then Louis Gossett Jr. goes, "Do you want to pick that up?" And then the director said, let's keep that in the movie, that's quite good. So that was literally just ad-libbed, which is funny how these ad-lib scenes become the most famous scenes in these movies. So there you go, there's that. And the other bit of trivia is that the film's got a body count, or total body count, of 18. So that's it, guys, that's all the trivia. That's the only bit of trivia that RJ could dig up for this movie. So let's have a look at the production. So as I usually say, I mean, I'll go back to when I first watched this film. I saw it on a trailer to another movie, and I thought, wow, this looks good, because at the time I was a massive fan of Die Hard. That type of siege movie was kicking around, and before this film came out, when I was at high school watching Die Hard, in a funny sort of way, I always thought it'd be pretty cool if they could make a film about a siege at high school and how those high school kids would deal with it. And then a couple of years later, I look at a trailer and I think, wow, they've made that film. And when I saw the trailer, I thought, this is brilliant. I noticed that it had Sean Astin in it, Will Wheaton, the dude from Adventures in Babysitting. So I think I was in my early teens then, so I was all up for this film. And I watched it, hiring it from a VHS rental store, and I came away and I was totally entertained with it. And the other thing I just want to mention here, it's just got to mention this because it's one of my loves, is I actually like the artwork to the front of this, to the front of the VHS cover here. It's actually the bit of artwork which I'll post on the Bitesize Cinema. It's pretty cool. And on a little bit of a segue here, guys, I do have a thumping heart for some good artwork on the VHS, and that is important. I know you can't read a book by its cover, but you can with VHS for me. And I just think that's important. I've seen some rubbish artwork for films, and I just think it lets it down, because I would say that is your candles on top of the icing on the cake. You can just make it. So there you go. Slight little segue there. But getting back to the film, so after doing a little bit of prep work for this, there was a couple of lines on IMDb when doing the research on the internet, which they actually made a really good point, and it's a point which is right in front of you, which you can overlook. But they said it's one of the last action movies to have a basic special effects before the reliance of computer generated special effects, which came out a year after this with Terminator 2. And then when Terminator 2 came out, that was it. It's like the new generation of computer graphic effects. So you could say this was like one of the last action movies just to have no computer effects at all. And then after actually reading that quote, it's actually quite a good point actually, and it's a point which it's always right in front of you, but you don't realise it until someone says it. So in that sort of early part of the 90s, before 91, all the films that we watched then in the 80s, like all the Cannon films, all the action movies like Predator, Rambo, Die Hard, they were all the effects and the explosions all real, or pyrotechnics and stuff like that. And then you had Terminator, so it was quite a big game changer in cinema, Terminator 2, and to how we actually see films today with all the special effects and stuff like that. So I never thought I'd be digging out Terminator 2 reviewing this film, but that's where it has led me. So all in all, as a roundup, Toy Soldiers is like one of the last action movies with basic practical special effects in the early 90s, and I'll say it's just one of them. I'm not saying it's the only one, but it's part of that group. But yeah, all in all, the other thing I was going to mention is an underrated film. I don't think it's got a cult status. I'm not sure, because I don't really hear that many people talking about this film, but when I do bring this film up or post it online, the response is quite good, and a lot of people say, hey, Toy Soldiers, I remember that film, that's a really good film. So the response like that is really good. So what I would say is I wouldn't say it's a cult film, but what I would say, I think it's a gem. I think it's a little bit underrated, and when people re-watch this film, certainly when I re-watched it, I thought it's actually a little bit better than I remember. It's actually quite a solid film. So there you go, guys, that's a bit of a roundup and a sort of building platform for how this film got put into production and all that sort of stuff, with all the cast and trivia and things like that. So let's have a look at a bite-sized review of this film. So the film starts with terrorists taking over the Palace of Justice in Colombia, and you're introduced to our main antagonist, Lou Cully, and his right-hand man, Jack Thorpe, who is an American. And these guys are worthy of having their backsides kicked by Chuck Norris. I'm just saying that. When I first watched this film and I saw this sequence, I thought, am I watching a canon film? Have I just walked into Delta Force or something like that? But it's not. But I'm just saying, these bad guys are definitely worthy of some Chuck Norris action. But anyway, going back to the film, so they are demanding the release, or he is demanding the release of his drug kingpin father, Enrique Calais. But he's found out that he has actually been taken to the United States for a trial. Calais then escapes with Jack Thorpe via a helicopter with a load of weapons, and they manage to get through the US through the Mexican border with the objective to release his father. You were then introduced to Regis High School and the teenage boys with wealthy, influential parents, and there's a group of pranksters there led by Billy Tepper, played by Sean Austin, and you've got Billy's friends Joey, Hank, Ricardo, Jonathan and Phil. And they're always being monitored by the school principal, Dean Parker, played by Louis Gossett Jr. And you get a couple of scenes here where they're graffitiing the school sign saying they're rejects. And Billy Tepper, who is kind of like the protagonist in this film, he has a real problem with authority, which helps him out later. And even though Dean Parker is always on his case, there's a little bit of a sort of love-hate relationship between them. And you have some scenes here where Billy's managed to smuggle in some vodka via some mouthwash, and how he can think outside the box with some technology where he's got a phone where he can tap into the main telephone system and then talk to a call girl, and it's just introduces a little bit of comedy to the film. And again, you've got Dean Parker, who infiltrates these shenanigans, and he tells Billy, he says, look, if you carry on like this, you're going to get expelled for the 4th time. You've already been expelled 3 times now. So it just sort of builds his character up a little bit. And amongst this group of friends is a guy called Phil, and his father is a federal judge who's going to be dealing with the case of Enrique Calais' trial. So him and his family are taken away by the FBI for protection. And then the next day, Louis Calais turns up with his group of henchmen, and they overtake the school. They kill the campus police officer and one of the faculty members, and they rig the whole campus up with explosives, which is rigged to a detonating device on Louis' arm, and they've also got heavy artillery on top of the rooftop, so no one can escape. And because Phil had left prior to Louis' arrival, he has now taken the whole school as hostage. The local sheriff has a go at trying to take him on, but as he drives his car and he gets taken out by a 50 cal machine gun, it's where you get like one of the first action scenes in a massive explosion. And then Louis releases the faculty, including Louis Gossett Jr. And the only people that he keeps in the school is obviously the students, where they do like a head count, and the headmaster and the school cooks. And at this time, the army, the FBI, have now arrived, and they've surrounded the whole perimeter of the school, trying to work out what they're going to do. Billy and his friends then decide to try and work out a way to thwart the terrorists, and they come up with some plans. Joey says, let's take them full on, let's try and get one of their weapons. And then Billy says, no, we've got to be a little bit more clever than that, we've got to be a little bit more tactical. So Billy comes up with this plan to say that let's gather as much information about these guys, let's try and get the numbers, let's try and get their firepower, where their weapons are positioned, and then let's try and get that information to the army and the FBI outside. So they gather all this information, then you've got a scene where you've just had this head count, and then they've got an hour, so then Billy escapes through the back of the school, through a sewer system with all this information, and he gets out and speaks to the army. Then the army capture him and say, right, we've got to make sure you are who you are. So that is then confirmed by Louis Gossett Jr. He says, yeah, I know him, I know this kid. And he helps him escape to try and get back for that head count. But then it's quite a sort of edge of the seat scene here. He's sort of thinking, oh, is he going to make it back? Because they're doing the head count. He hasn't got back. The terrorists are head counting about 2 or 3 times here. And then Billy comes in and he's got a towel wrapped around him, making a little, oh, I was in the shower, you know, I didn't hear the bell go. You then got a scene where Joey's father, which is Will Wheaton's dad, he is a New York City mob boss, and he has had dealings with Louis' father, and he asked him to be released with some dodgy dealings that they'd done in the past, and this all gets agreed. So then Joey is brought into the office, he speaks to Louis and says, you're free to go. But Joey refuses to go, he says, I don't want to leave my friends, and he says, no, I want you off the premises, walk out. So Joey's walking across the corridor and he takes out one of the terrorists and he picks up one of the machine guns. Quite a bad scene actually, because he runs out, tries to fire the weapon, he can't fire the weapon, it goes up in the air and he ends up getting shot and he gets killed and he's left on the steps. And in retaliation to this, outside of the school, Joey's father arranges for Louis' father to get killed in prison. He gets his throat slashed in a riot. So now Louis' father is dead, and now the FBI and the army know this, and they're thinking that if he finds out, he's more than likely going to blow up the school, so we're going to have to go in and take that school out. So the army now covertly infiltrate the school, and whilst all this is happening, Betty and his friends come up with a plan to take out the detonator, and they go through some ceiling ducts to get into Louis' office. And what they do here is they switch some microchips from Betty's friend's plane. He's got like a flying machine. He uses that microchip and then switches it with the detonator, and they manage to sabotage Louis' device. And I forgot to mention this, Billy knows that the army is coming in because there was like a Morse code at their window with some lights. And Louis Gossett Jr. said to the army, he said, look, I know Billy, he's not going to take authority, so I know he's going to be up to some sort of plan. So between them, they're working together very cleverly. So then after sabotaging this device, Billy then takes on some of the terrorists. There's a cool scene where he's on pots and pan duties in the kitchen. One of the terrorists comes up to him and says, what are you doing? And Billy goes, I'm on pots and pans. And he turns around and he goes, pots and pans? He just like smacks him around the head and takes him down. He then retrieves one of their machine guns. Between him and his other friends, they take on another terrorist, and then they manage to get all the other kids into the basement underground, and then Billy stays up above ground trying to fend off all the other terrorists. And then at this time the army have intervened, they've got the helicopters, they've got all the gunships, and they take on all the terrorists on the roofs. Jack Thorpe's Louis' right hand man gets blown away by a 50 cal machine gun by one of the gunships. And then Billy gets captured by Louis and he gets taken as a hostage, and you get a scene here where Louis Gossett Jr. turns up with some other army guys, and you've got like a bit of a standoff here, and then Louis the bad guy gets a headshot and he gets taken out, and then Billy manages to survive and get away. So that's it, that's the film, that's it, everybody gets out, terrorists get taken down, and that is pretty much the end of the film, guys. That is it, that is Toy Soldiers. And I think my final roundup of watching this film after watching it recently is that it isn't like a die-hard rip-off as such. It is a different film, it's of the same sort of genre, but they're giving you a different way of dealing with this terrorist threat in terms of Billy being the main protagonist. He's thinking about it, he's more, instead of taking the threat on head-on like John McClane does, which it works out brilliantly in that film, it's more about him. So at the beginning of the film you see him with his shenanigan, he's thinking outside the box, he's thinking how I can get liquor into the school, and it's very much a sort of thinking man's game, and he's using all that sort of stuff to be able to thwart the terrorists. So that's very clever, and that's the main sort of focus of the film, on how teenagers would rebel against terrorists in this sort of situation. And I do actually think it probably deserves a remake. I wouldn't mind seeing a remake. I don't usually say remakes as such, but I think this film could probably deserve a remake. So that's kind of like my final verdict on this film. Oh, and one other thing to mention, I'll leave you with this for, and I did mention this at the beginning, I mentioned Chuck Norris, and what is Chuck Norris usually related to? Cannon Movies. And could you imagine if Cannon Movies got hold of this film? It'd probably be different. It'd probably be Chuck Norris playing the role of a teenager, being a man in his 40s or something like that, and kicking the total butt out of these terrorists. So you probably would have had a different film, but there you go. That is me going into an alternate universe. I'll just leave you with that thought. Good old Cannon. So there you go, guys, that's my bite-sized review of Toy Soldiers. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. If you have, like I say, hopefully you appreciate it as a gem of a film as I do. So let's talk about what I'm going to be doing next. I will be back soon for a film called Chud, which came out in 1984, I believe. So it's a horror film. A very cheap budget film, which I'll get into. I'll save all that for that episode. And then after that, I'm going to be doing Fright Night from 1985. So I'm looking forward to doing that. It's a real cult classic horror movie. So look out for those guys. I'll be back soon. And as a bit of admin, I am a proud member of the Legion podcast. So check out all the other cool shows there. And you can find Bitesize Cinema on YouTube and iTunes. And I've also got a Facebook page, so thank you to all you guys who contribute to that page, and we're just having fun. That's what it's all about, and that's what the show's all about, and that's why I do it. And the other thing I'll just mention here is I got some positive feedback from the Legion Podcast Network. The download figures are looking really good for the last 2 months, especially where I've only just kick-started this show off. It's all brand new and things like that. And so thank you to you guys for your support and listening to the show. And more importantly, I do this show just for you guys. I love talking movies, so more importantly, I hope I'm keeping you guys entertained, and long so may it continue with all these films that are out there to explore and have a look at and all that sort of stuff. So let's close the show, guys. Keep it bite-sized, keep it safe, and I will see you soon.
If you enjoyed this show, then make sure you check out the other great shows on the Legion Podcast Network, like Cinema Psyops, Cinema Beef, Devour the Podcast, Duncan and Bo Come Correct, Exploding Heads Horror Movie Podcast, Friday the 13th, Get Slayed, The Helming Power Hour, Hello, This is the Doom Show, Hero Hero Go Show, Kill the Cast, Underwater Kaiju from Outer Space, Jerry Hates Action, Legion After Dark, Mental Health, Obsessive Cinema, Discourse, Pick 6 Movies, the podcast by The Cemetery, the podcast on Haunted Hill, the Psychosemantic Podcast, Rick Radio, House of Wax, Dude Looks Like the 80s, Rabbit and Red Radio, the Shadecast, Short Bus Cinema, 2 Drink Minimum Commentaries, the VD Clinic, Who Will Survive Horror Podcast, and Witch vs. the Doomsday Clock. With such a wide spread of shows, there is guaranteed to be a niche for you to fall in love with. Horror, politics, movies, books, sex, music, commentaries, health, video games, kaiju, action, news, comedy, and opinions that would most likely get you killed in some parts of the world. We are proud to bring you some of the best podcasting in the world. Check us out at www.legionpodcast.com, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, and any other dark corner of the internet where podcasts can be found.